Our next speaker is a fine art photographer who specializes in architectural photography. Himself being a trained architect, it's particularly significant when he talks about capturing a moment in architecture, or in a sense, a temporal view of architecture. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Joginder Singh.
So as you would have guessed, I will be talking about the Zen of Photography. I'm just kidding. I particularly like this image because of the duality of light and silhouette that happens with light on the face and the mudra being in silhouette. I've been exploring various dualities in photography, and I do a lot of personal work where I travel. I tend to photograph places that I travel to, or take on these self-appointed projects like shooting Ladakh, and typically the architecture in Ladakh. Yes, sometimes people in the architecture doing what they do, high levels of meditation. Ladakh has been a place of refuge, a place where one unwinds, a place where one escapes because you don't get signal on your phone. And yeah, so sometimes one has climbed up, trekked up to mountains and waited for the last light of the sun reflecting off meandering rivers. Or knelt down next to one of those rivers and tried to see how light was creating its own chiaroscuro on the rock bed below. This is light passing through ripples of water. One has gone onto freshly laid roads where you stopped the jeep and said, okay, can I take a picture before the mud goes onto this black? Then I started going to Ladakh in all seasons. I wanted to explore how the place changes, how the vegetation changes. So I made it in April when the trees were in bloom, the plum and cherry trees, or late November, December, when the vegetation loses all its foliage and there is a certain transparency to the landscape, or mid-Feb, March, when you see fall colors in certain areas of Ladakh, not everywhere. Then of course the urge to climb up to get the architecture within the context, within the landscape started, and of course I was much younger then. Climbing really high up to get laid down, waking up. You see kitchens coming out, light coming from, and light in the mountains is really magical for me because it suddenly peeks out from behind this mountain. You know it's daytime, but you know, when it just grazes the ridge and then falls on the valley below, there's some magic that happens. I started shooting the architecture there. This was again adobe. They build in adobe all over the place. The roofs are also mud. Again, images that explain how the buildings sit in the landscape on stormy days or on beautiful days where just the building is spotlit. And this dappled light, this variation that happens only in the mountains. This has happened now. It was a brightly lit day, but it was just about timing that there was a passing cloud and that shielded the sun and the field came into shadow, and you know, the building was still lit, so you could time it. Then of course, how minuscule the architecture becomes in the face of the mountain. Sometimes it's almost the rubble of the mountain. Each of these openings that you see are caves where monks have meditated. Some of these caves are beautifully illustrated inside. I trudged up to very remote monasteries to be greeted very warmly by people there who, you know, amazingly, the harshness of the landscape brings out a certain gentleness. I don't know how that works. Again, waiting for that particular moment where, you know, just the building would be lit. Got it on the third day, of course. I started photographing skylines of these very monuments. Transition through the spaces, young monk getting late for the early morning prayer. There's pressure there as well. And then getting invited into their world because they realize that I wasn't a threat in any manner. I was just quietly taking pictures. So I would, of course, shoot them before enjoying the butter tea. I couldn't resist doing architectural documentations because for me as an architect, it was also important to understand how the process of building happened, and I have a deep interest in the vernacular. This is Old Leh, right at the base of the Leh Fort. One of these treks, I was very lucky to have the cloud formation mirroring the valley and then the rainbow crossing through. While I still decided I was young, I decided to walk the chadar. This is the Zanskar River that freezes and has been for many, many years the passage through from Ladakh to Zanskar. And I had a team of 4 people. I had to learn how to walk. You can't walk normally on this ice. You have to swaddle like the penguins do. And at the end of day 1, your calves hurt like crazy because that's not your natural way of walking. These are Zanskari people who know how to read the ice, and they can tell from the color of the ice whether it's safe to walk across. If it wasn't, you had to climb up onto the mountain and come where they could detect that it's now safe. So sometimes you were walking on that little strip on the left, and I always decided to walk behind them because of obvious reasons, mostly camera equipment. But when you climb up on these mountains, you realize how difficult life is and how taken for granted we take building materials like this, where these guys are dragging the logs across to their village because they're not available there for building their houses. It was an intimate exploration of leaves and air bubbles in water or icicles. Okay, I have a slight OCD where I have to align things, so you can see the icicle aligning with the triangle there, and it takes a lot of effort in aligning these layers. On another solitary trek, just me and a horseman, we didn't have a tent. We crossed from Padam to Dharcha. We just had a tarpaulin sheet, so every evening used to be this exercise on site to make a tent with my tripod, his horse stick, and some string, and we huddled in that. I'm amazed how the buildings are sited in these places and what clouds do, and even after this picture you wouldn't want to walk up because you're already exhausted reaching this point. Chortens in a winter landscape where the leaves have gone, or the precariousness with which buildings are perched onto. This could be anywhere, but it is Ladakh. But I couldn't resist photographing the curve. Geometry really interests me. So whether it's in vegetation composition, the relationship of lines with the boundaries of the frame has been a very constant preoccupation. It's my cookie cutter when I'm putting the camera to the eye. So what I arrange within that leads to a very similar geometry from what you saw. And I enjoyed shooting Calatrava's work a lot. Some of his projects, not too many. Unfortunately, when you're shooting abroad, if you're not commissioned for it, you're doing a lot of architectural photography handheld, which is a problem. Normally, you work on a tripod where you're being critical about aligning lines and spaces and choosing lenses. Riaz, I hope you're hearing this. Not overtly wide angle. But yeah, you get really hassled when the lines, there is no frame of reference, there is no horizontal, there is no vertical, then you wonder whether you held the camera right or not. So I shot the City of Arts and Sciences over 2 days. Thank you. This was very beautiful. It was, of course, teeming with people. So some of these pictures are in the afternoon when everyone was too tired to walk around. Yeah, I was shooting how Calatrava handles light, and you know how the materiality works with light, or how the transition happens. But I wasn't happy with. I was looking for this one image which would encapsulate his work. And while going on the train from Barcelona to Valencia, where these projects are, I had watched a couple of films on Calatrava, of course in Spanish. I didn't understand a word, but then films are again visuals and you understand visuals. So I shot more buildings. I spent the next day walking around and then I found the image, you know. And to me, this represents Calatrava because this is where he draws his inspiration. This is where the forms evolve. And I thought that was a juxtaposition that worked beautifully for me. I saw how he was handling light, trying to soften the concrete, the geometry of the concrete. I saw Gaudi doing exactly the same thing in one of his castles. It was arches, but again lit up by these portholes and windows. Again, a series of arches by Gaudi, but beautifully lit up. So, and of course, Sagrada Familia, which is mind-blowing. I looked through the sculptural stuff that he had made. I shot a little bit of Bota once. But then, of course, if you're interested in light, you have to go to Berlin to see this building. And I'm taking you down the route. Again, all done handheld because tripods are not allowed and bags are not allowed. And so you're hanging cameras and shoving lenses wherever you can, but hoping to pass the security check. But yeah, it was quite magical walking down these faces. So light, shade, of course, but you know, pictures don't capture sound, unfortunately. So the crunch on these things was amazing. And of course, geometry there. Geometry again. The softness of the plant working with the harshness of the building that he had. So once I'd seen the spaces inside, I was very curious to see these so-called lashes, which were very symbolic to me from the outside. And you know, they don't seem so severe when they contrast with the vegetation outside. Yes, sometimes I like to do the blue hour, which is when light and sky and everything is in unison. This was a beautiful building again outside of Barcelona, a flea market. Herzog and de Meuron's work also I find fascinating, their materiality, how they organize, scale the whole mass supported on that little delicate wall of glass. And then I thought, let me try some passage of people and how the building relates, and of course again graphic compositions of their work. I had to visit Vitra, but other than this cliched image of the building, I'm very fond of this image of this space because this captures to me the way I was talking about the lack of verticals and horizontals. Try shooting Zaha Hadid. You just die trying to figure out where the camera is level, and your traditional perspectives go for a toss when everything is non-parallel. But beautiful spaces. I was very lucky. The guide understood what I was wanting to do, unclipped the rope and said 5 minutes, and then I was inside the space. And when you're shooting something like this in 5 minutes, you are all your sensibilities are aligned. All these years of making mistakes really make you hasten. You see the relationship between masses of the bench and the building, and then the other building, which very similarly on a much larger scale. This is in Vienna. And now I didn't know if I could walk straight or if I had to align myself to the staircase while walking up, but it was quite airy, beautifully airy. I shot the Kunsthaus at Basel, and I see Madhav creeping up. I'm quickening, I can see the timer there. Again, the gray, the monochrome, the light, the curves, and this beautiful square by Pipolati Wrist in St. Gallen, where it's almost like a red sheet which is billowed and frozen in time. My first encounter with Gary, and then of course the following encounters. Again, I'm exploring line and form in Gary's work, but then prohibited photography, of course, I specialize in because I am so charming. I shot Richard Serra and Gary in communication. I just played dumb. I couldn't hear announcements going on, photographer, go. Anyways, so this is through those metallic plates looking up at the balcony, the curves. This is the closest I come to a selfie. That's me down there under Anish Kapoor's beam. I enjoy shooting space in the outdoors, and this is my little one who was jumping in unison with the fountain. It went down and then this one would jump along with that. So I don't shoot much when I'm traveling with family though. It's difficult. I like this duality again. This takes me back to the first image where the building is lit and something is in silhouette. Again, silhouettes, but contemplative moments in space, urban scenarios, and sometimes you become a voyeur to another photographer who's again enjoying some work. Yeah, this is almost scale. I enjoy people passing through. And then this was amazing. This was at the Kunsthaus Museum by Peter Zumthor. I shot the staircase. I love the darkness, the low levels of light. It was the ceiling was lit up, and I waited for people to come. It was quite a long wait, so I was tired. And then I leaned against the wall on this side, on the right, and that's when I noticed the connection between the wall and the wall I was leaning against. And I thought that this was more significant for me because I was understanding how the forms were interacting and the building was beginning to reveal itself. So from I bring you back home to Padmanabhapuram, which has been one of the favorite buildings for me to photograph, because this was my encounter with Padmanabhapuram and Kerala. I spent over a year shooting for this book on, this is now out of print. We are trying to figure out how to resurrect. I spent a year going across India shooting for forts and palaces of India, and it was amazing because whatever little architecture they teach you in colleges hadn't prepared me for the connections that I experienced in these spaces while shooting. So 100 locations. Then I was fortunate enough to get commissioned to shoot this book on the arts and interiors. I had the privilege of having a studio in the basement in Rashtrapati Bhavan, of course the cinema hall toilet, because that was the largest space they could give me. And this was beautiful. Then I again collaborated with Ramu Katakam on this book on stone. I shot Ellora for over 10 days and Elephanta, and then I did Hampi from a paraglider because I wanted to see the rocks from the air. And of course, Cambodia, Angkor Wat. This book, some of you know, it was launched on the 12th here. Some urban images that one shoots for a living. Transparency, projects by Gurjeet, for a client who's at Tadawando, some hospitality. The same treatment to light, thank you. And very quickly, I'm going to wrap this up with a small peep into the fine art work that I started doing many years work. I don't understand what fine art means. It's the same approach, it's the same intensity that one takes to anything. This was a staircase in moonlight on a total blackout in Trivandrum. Never seen it like that because there was always a eerie bulb in the staircase. Similarly lit up squinches in the Qutub Minar complex. Then I shot Jantar Mantar for over 3 years for an exhibition called Form and Reform, and my OCD came to the fore where I again had to wait for an hour for that shadow to align with the white. You know, you can see it in one straight line, but this came after a long wait. Or after 3 years, you realize that only in October does this arch light up. It doesn't light up at any other time. I crawled under Jantar Mantar, wherever, and I was reading a book on Mondrian at that time, so you can see where this is coming from. The first light hitting a mosque, you had to again use your charm to get inside because the caretaker wouldn't let you in earlier. Transition in a modern building. The image is getting cropped, unfortunately, on the screen, which means you've seen an entirely cropped presentation. Connections, lines, staircases, beautiful jali in the Orcha fort where you realize that the top two rows are straight see-through, and then somehow the designers try to change the angle back to Padmanabhapuram, understanding how to organize layers in the struts at Padmanabhapuram, each one lit up beautifully, or light, how it passes through the trellises there and how it cuts down the glare and how soothing it is to be in that building. You've seen this image printed outside. This is again Gaudi, not how I would like to typically project Gaudi. This was again a juxtaposition of masses at the Jewish Memorial in Berlin. I was tired of shooting through those pillars, walking through. So when I perched myself on one of these and before the guard shooed me away, I could try this. I sometimes shoot things as neat as handrails down a curved staircase. This is what led to the two white pictures that you see in the exhibition. I was shooting this building, but I was unhappy with the light and shade that I so loved to capture, and then the cloud gods intervened and there was this absence of dark light. I love these juxtapositions, I love these alignments, how planes, the absence of harsh shadow, the series of columns and beams going down a corridor. And that's me. Thank you.